just don't make them like they used to.
Snouty Pig presents a Mola Monster Macabre production of 31 Nights of Modern Halloween Horror Classics. Starring Zombie Sundays,
Vampire Mondays,
Psycho Tuesdays. First, a little trick and treat.
But it didn't bother me more. I was surprised I knew what to do. I can feel how I've changed.
There is an idea of a Patrick Bateman, some kind of abstraction, but there is no real me, only an entity, something illusory. And though I can hide my cold gaze, and you can shake my hand and feel flesh gripping yours, and maybe you can even sense our lifestyles are probably comparable, I simply am not there.
Do we look like a couple of psycho killers to you?
Well, it's hard to say. Looks can be deceiving.
You shamed me. Apologize at once.
What about the people who hurt you? Don't you ever want to make them suffer?
Sorry, sir, what? Take the weapon and use it.
I'd take Dee Dee's head off in a second if I had to.
He always said that.
Any questions?
Yeah, who the hell are you?
What happened is pretty nasty.
Greetings, I'm Count Mola Pigula, and I'm joined by Mr. Macabro.
How are all you snouty pigs doing out there? Ready to be shocked, rocked, and scared snoutless?
We've carefully selected a modern horror classic for every night in October. Think of it as a month-long, freakish festival of contemporary fright films. You may not only discover some new favorites, but also that, yeah, they still make them like they used to. American Psycho is a contemporary counterpart to the Stanley Kubrick horror classic The Shining. Like Kubrick's film, it is a deeply stylish movie that is visually layered and thematically complex, and a film that rewards you with each repeat viewing. American Psycho made us remember horror can also be high art, and demonstrated that serious actors can partake of the genre and keep their art house credibility.
Even though the film takes place in the 80s, it really ushers in the type of filmic energy that still resonates today in the horror genre. It's a sleek personal hell that spirals us through one man's struggle to find validation in an otherwise empty, materialistic society.
Yeah, it's a life explored through socioeconomic and political themes, masked as a character study of one Patrick Bateman.
There is an idea of a Patrick Bateman, some kind of abstraction.
Bateman, in an attempt to scream over the drowning opulence surrounding him, beautifully succumbs to a madness that drives his story like an angry drunk yuppie barreling a Mercedes through an oblivious, self-indulgent crowd.
Yeah, and it's a madness that is driven by conformity. In fact, he describes the song Hip to Be Square as a song about the pleasures of conformity. At a later point, he snaps at his girlfriend that he just wants to fit in, even if fitting in is what drives him insane.
I hate that job anyway. See why you just don't quit.
Because I want to fit in.
I think their undisputed masterpiece is Hip to Be Square. A song so catchy, most people probably don't listen to the lyrics, but they should, because it's not just about the pleasures of conformity and the importance of trends, it's also a personal statement about the band itself.
The film deals quite well with the horrors of conformity, asking the question, how far are we willing to go to be heard in a superficial blunderland? His dialogues on the intellectual undertones of music as it relates to the theme of mindless consumerism speaks to Bateman's own situation, where people can't see him for what he truly is, because they're so busy with themselves.
This is further explored in how no one seems to know anybody, and no one is paying attention. Bateman is confused for certain colleagues, while other colleagues, presumed missing, are seen across the Atlantic. Oddly enough, this plays into how conformity is explored in the film within corporate America. It's like one cog is the same as another.
All the mayhem I have caused, and my utter indifference toward it, I have now surpassed.
In fact, if we were to think of Bateman as an in-the-flesh and blood representation of a corporation, we can understand how this so-called individual is able to get away with murder.
If Bateman is a corporate entity, both there and not there, then the murders he gets away with have added meaning, beyond just reflecting the savagery of corporate wars, but rather the true casualties of such a power struggle.
Yeah, an analysis of the murders would actually suggest that all of them were basically second-class citizens that were murdered. The first on-screen murder is of a homeless black man. Then it's his dog, a pet. Then it's a Yale colleague whom is suggested may be homosexual. His murders include a lesbian, a working girl, a senior citizen, and a couple of working-class Joes. Traditionally, these citizens have not done well in corporate America.
Aha! Very true, and still also relevant today. Perhaps that's what helps American Psycho remain such a strong film over a decade later. The film is prophetic, and a multi-layered treat. Sleek, mesmerizing, frightening.
It's our selection to open our 31 nights of modern Halloween horror classics. What sort of fate awaits our intrepid, informed consumer? Find out in the horrors of American Psycho.
We'll go find your friends. You should relax. Tucker and Dale are on the case. Ain't that right, Tucker?
Yeah.
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 Yeah, good man. Okay.
Dale, just be careful, okay? My friends can be kind of judgmental.
I know. I'm going to let Tucker do most of the talking anyway. He can win over just about anybody, can't you, Tucker? Real people person.
Tucker and Dale vs. Evil flips horror conventions in strange, unexpected, and truly hilarious ways. Not only does it revolve around great, sympathetic underdogs, it pits them with the perfect antagonists, teenage jerks. Because, let's be honest, they deserved it all along in these movies.
College kids! College kids! College kids! Hey, college kids! College kids!
Yeah, Tucker and Dale does for hillbilly horror what Shaun of the Dead did for zombies. It took a simple premise and turned it on its head by adding layers of humor and made it more than a survivor's story or tragedy.
We're trading in the British pints for Virginian moonshine here, or so we think, because things are not what you would expect here. It also wittingly brings up many burning questions that have plagued loud moviegoers for decades. Mostly, why would he or she do that? It has a weird kind of Patch Adams approach. Whereas most movies grant us a sort of catharsis by means of confronting our fears, Tucker and Dale works in humor. Almost as if to say, death just happens to be a silly happenstance.
Yeah, it's playful with both death and gore. I like that the film actually tells the story from two perspectives, each of which believes they are the victim of the story, and each side can actually lay equal claim to being the victim from their perspective. This is part of what makes the film so good, that it takes a lot of care to give credence to all sides of the issue and thus excuse these erratic behaviors.
I'm telling you though, Tucker, you would have been proud of me. A smart little college girl like that, and I was beating the crap out of her.
Dale.
Yeah?
You beat the crap out of everybody. There's something wrong with your brain.
I know, you keep telling me that. Well, I'll tell you what. When we get back, I'll finish her off real quick, and then we'll get back to work, okay? They're gonna kill her.
By exploring the story from both perspectives, we also get some sincere insight on the fear of the unknown, and how a simple misunderstanding can plummet us into madness.
Oh yeah, brilliant, hilarious, maniacally funny kind of madness. Not only does the film engage two perspectives, it visually alludes to the quirks, idiosyncrasies, mannerisms, and cultural values within each of these groups, where one man's trash is another man's treasure. One group sees a house and it's a perfect vacation home. The other group sees it as a dangerous, spooky, terrifying place to be avoided.
Some classic adages never go out of style, and it really calls into question who in the horror genre might have just been totally misunderstood. For such a simple setup, Tucker and Dale really does take the time to acquaint us with both sides, and that adds so much intimacy to the story.
Yeah, we compared the American Psycho to The Shining as a classic horror film. I would say that Tucker and Dale's classic counterpart is probably Peter Jackson's Brain Dead, aka Dead Alive. They both have a ton of humor.
Tucker and Dale does harken back to Jackson's film in that we are invited into typical horror scenarios. However, logic takes a back seat, and we are whisked through their respective stories in the most unexpected and hilarious ways possible. Jackson's protagonist is so chained to his mother that he defies logic by keeping her around, which is the central point in that story. That reversal resonates within Tucker and Dale too, defying and reversing horror conventions. It's fun to note as well that the protagonists have the best of intentions throughout both stories. Both films lovingly question the typical motives found in the genre, and play to the strength of nightmare logic, where the emotional overpowers the logical.
Yeah, and much of the fun of each film is derived in watching those intentions backfire in unexpected and hilarious ways. Something interesting I noticed when I was editing film footage for the video is that you can actually cut this movie in such a way that we would never know that the good guys are not, in fact, the bad guys.
Man, I love to hate bad people, and this film indulges in that department a whole lot.
Speaking of indulgences, the film openly indulges on many classic horror tropes. There's a spooky lake, a kidnapping, a hillbilly chainsaw chase scene, a machete-wielding psycho, a creepy cabin, and even a useless police officer.
This is a film with extensive and passionate knowledge of the genre, and engages us in a conversation about these tropes without being mean-spirited or overly critical to the point where it overtakes the story. Cabin in the Woods, you should have taken notes.
Yeah, it does subtly use meta-reference humor to great effect, although I don't entirely agree with you about Cabin in the Woods, but I see your point. Films with surprises, layers, and multiple meanings make up a big chunk of our selections for 31 Nights of Modern Halloween Horror Classics, and it's a great reason to watch or rewatch Tucker and Dale vs. Evil. Coming up next is Drag Me to Hell. Why is Drag Me to Hell on this list? Well, because you can compare it to Hitchcock's The Birds. It takes human drama and uses supernatural metaphors to explore human behaviors. On the surface, Drag Me to Hell is a gypsy curse story, but below lies a well-crafted exploration of a woman obsessed with her self-image to the point that it drives her to develop an eating disorder that endangers her health and might result in leading her to an early grave. And like a typical Sam Raimi horror film, it has its lighter side with plenty of genuine scares.
Also noteworthy is the fact that Drag Me to Hell got away with a PG-13 rating. Raimi really broke the mold for the much maligned PG-13 horror film. This movie has a ton of tense, scary moments, and it accomplishes this without any excess of blood and gore, which is never a bad thing to have when done right. But it is Raimi, so you can definitely expect some delightfully cringeworthy moments, especially when you consider Raimi's long-standing knee-deep roots in the red stuff.
I honestly assumed it was an R-rated film. That really does make it an impressive accomplishment. Horror fans should not be wary of the rating. It definitely delivers plenty of nasty chunks, to put it mildly.
Raimi is in classic form here, revisiting his fascination with tampering with the spooky arcane stuff, with horrifying and sometimes twistedly hilarious results.
What did you think of the combination of CGI and practical effects?
I remember being extremely off-put by Raimi's use of CGI in Spider-Man. I just could not accept it. Certainly not from the man who helped pioneer cheap but effective ooey-gooey practical special effects.
I think the CGI was pretty weak in Drag Me to Hell, but Raimi, like in his low-budget horror films, makes the best of it, and a lot of the fun is in watching these campy, cheap effects. In fact, as serious as Drag Me to Hell can be, it also successfully takes the time to make use of good old-fashioned camp.
You really won't care about the CGI here because there's plenty of insane practical effects that get away with a lot for a PG-13 rating. You'll laugh, you'll cringe, you'll scream. You'll be glad you watched it as part of our 31 nights of modern horror movie classics. The first Friday of the month is next, and every Friday and Saturday we have 2 nightly horror films for you to devour. Our first double feature will include some of the best contemporary fright films for the whole family. ParaNorman isn't your common squeaky clean child's horror movie. Instead, ParaNorman is the black sheep of the crop, the kid that revels in rolling around in dirty dead things. And it appeals to the inner child of the same nature, the outsider, while dealing with some pretty mature themes. The movie also surprisingly banks on the subversive as a means to welcome the whole family. The filmmakers invite us to trust them with their sincere approach to mature subject matter. And rightfully so, because everything comes together to relay pretty powerful messages on the virtues of forgiveness, facing fears, and hey, even an anti-bullying message. Just be sure to not dismiss ParaNorman as a simple children's horror movie. It's truly a fright film for the whole family, or even just to indulge an inner child that happens to like weird and spooky stuff.
ParaNorman may not be squeaky clean, but it is a beautiful film, and in fact it's a film that artists can point to and say, ooh, pretty. It really is visually one of the most luscious films you will see. Forget that it's a children's horror tale, because there's just so much to appreciate here.
The craftsmanship is astounding here. Characters move so fluidly you'd swear that they were flesh and bone. Every character is engaging, if at the very least from a visual standpoint. And especially the zombies. You can tell that the filmmakers really had fun with their weight and movement. It's also great to see such a spooky, fun tale filtered through such a relatable, lovable kid.
He is very relatable, and the film is very relatable. I like to imagine that, in fact, if you and me had met when we were that age, we would dream up the kinds of nightmarishly cool witch and zombie adventures of which Norman and his friend Neil partake. In some ways, the film reminds me of The Goonies. It's a story where the children are the focal point, and both stories have elements of mystery and long-lost history.
It reminds me a lot of its classic horror counterpart, Hocus Pocus. Both stories entice our inner child with subversive elements that we were probably pulled away from, or would have otherwise shied away from. And both films ultimately encourage us to face our fears, to understand who or what we may have shunned previously.
Yeah, speaking to the last point, I think that one of the reasons why I prefer ParaNorman to Frankenweenie is largely because Tim Burton's film decided early on who the monsters were going to be. It defined the good guys and defined the bad guys, as Burton's films often do. Frankenweenie is a lot more black and white, if you'll forgive the visual pun.
ParaNorman is undoubtedly deep. ranging from story to craftsmanship. Do not pass this one up as just another children's movie. ParaNorman will exceed your expectations and blow your whole family's mind with a richness of character and again, shockingly poignant messages that reach both kids and adults.
It's a really great first feature for our Friday Fright Fest. Next up is Coraline.
I want to go home.
All will be swell soon as Mother's refreshed. Her strength is our strength. Mustn't talk when Mother's not here.
If you won't even talk to me, I'm gonna find the other Whitey. He'll help me.
No point. He pulled a long face, and Mother didn't like it.
Of all the recent stop-motion horror films, including Corpse Bride, Frankenweenie, ParaNorman, and Wallace and Gromit's The Curse of the Were-Rabbit, I think Coraline is definitely the scariest. It's a film that grows on you with time. When I saw it in theaters, I wasn't too impressed and felt like it left me wanting more. But the film lingered on, and the longer it sat with me, the more impressed I was with the little nuggets in the film.
Coraline has plenty of little nuggets indeed, despite being somewhat downplayed by the heavy fantasy elements. But it just serves to further strengthen the horror elements when they eventually strike.
ParaNorman may have the bigger sets and the better effects, but I really thought Coraline's director, Henry Selick, used his sets better. He has the storm set, the forest, the house, and the world of the other. It creates a lot of atmosphere and sets the mood for his story a little bit better than any of the recent stop-motion horror films. The opening sequence, which features stitch work that strikes me as both relevant to the story and just simply stylistically beautiful, it sets the pace for the rest of the film. It really requires a certain amount of patience as they weave their magic. I like that the antagonist, in fact, is a combination of a spider and a witch. It relates to the web she weaves to attract a curious little fly in the form of Coraline.
It's a wonderful combination, especially when taking into consideration the weaving motif in general, what with the dolls and all. I will admit, the story successfully lures you in a manner most similar to Coraline's adventure.
Yeah, I do think that in terms of her adventure, Coraline's story deals with the little girl's difficulties adjusting to having her world turn upside down better than, say, any of the other stop-motion animation films. She's lonely, she's estranged from her friends, she's trapped in a world of all work and no play adults, and it's all very successfully explored from a child's perspective. The family dynamic is established early to make the elements of fantasy even more appealing. It makes it that much more effective when we see it through Coraline's eyes.
I think Coraline is a great entry-level horror film for kids, one that eases them into the genre. The film makes them none the wiser about the excessively dark and frightening nature of the other world by dropping their guard, using fantasy and eye candy. It invokes memories of that good old tunnel scene from Willy Wonka. Coraline is a great fable for its brattier audience members. Be careful what you wish for, because it might just come at a price, or you might not like the results.
Simply put, I think it's a very smart film, and it takes repeated viewings to catch how themes are interdependent. If you want to compare it to children's horror classics, I wouldn't compare it to Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas. I would compare it to horror classics like The Dark Crystal or The Labyrinth. A little slower paced, but very rewarding and ultimately beautifully gothic and dark.
I'm totally willing to get caught in this film's web again, and so should you.
Well then, Bruce, what scares you?
The self-destructive nature of the human condition.
Just taking the piss now.
What do you think so?
How about you then, Spoon?
Castration.
What about you, Coop?
Spiders. And women. And, spider women.
It feels like werewolves have been playing second fiddle for a long time now, tragically being tethered to the vampire. They're pretty much like a blood-soaked poodle at this point, so it's refreshing to see a movie like Dog Soldiers take charge and say, hey, werewolves are still scary on their own, don't you forget that. While the setup is fairly typical, Dog Soldiers really breaks into the scene with its depiction of the titular beasts.
werewolf films are the underfed, underappreciated mongrel roving the streets of horrordom. They are the abandoned mutt left to its own devices, and only assholes give them any attention, usually the wrong kind, and it creates such a bad impression of that canine that it's hard even for the dog lover to care. But there are a few rare people who will take these mongrels in and nurture them so that they prove to be far more reliable than the more prominent breeds that are out there these days. Neil Marshall is one of these people, and thank the horror gods for that.
Most definitely. Marshall really knows how to tap into that brutal, scary core of the beast. So it's great to see these truly frightening, relentless, and bloodthirsty dog soldiers tearing up the screen.
Yeah, the emphasis is on beast here because unlike recent iterations of lycanthropes, Marshall's beasts are half human, half wolf, all monster. Dog Soldiers is all bark with plenty of bite. The story hits a few familiar notes, but one thing that does stand out, and one of the more pleasing aspects of the film, is the very visible brotherly devotion these soldiers have for one another. They are a pack, and it's a showdown against a pack of another kind.
And while we may be treading on some woefully familiar ground with the plot, story, and characters, it really is the depiction of the werewolf here that makes Dog Soldiers pure gold. It makes you yearn for bygone years where films like An American Werewolf in London and The Howling strutted around as the alpha dogs in this pack.
Yeah, its setting, in this case the Scottish Highlands, was a really good move. The forestry serves as an excellent backdrop and helps to strengthen the survive the wild mentality that is a part of the film's atmosphere.
The atmosphere really sold me as well. The foggy countryside really invokes the spirit of the Wolfman and, again, An American Werewolf in London. It was a sight to behold, and one that inspires plenty of tension, dread, and a real fear for what lurks right outside. Despite these visual similarities, I find that Dog Soldiers has much more in common with classic Fred films like The Evil Dead.
That's an interesting comparison. Both films are a bit crude, but very atmospheric and impressively made on small budgets. Both come from first-time directors, and one can only hope that Dog Soldiers inspires the imaginations of future filmmakers, so we'll see more modern classics like this one.
True. Both were accompanied by then green directors who worked hard with their cast and crew to conjure up gory, tense, and atmospheric gems. Their offerings of blood, sweat, and no doubt tears really pay off for their respective films.
Feast, by contemporary horror standards, is a unique animal. It's a practical effects heavy creature feature that falls back on classic tropes, but manages to entertain and keep you interested throughout. If you feel like you've been down that road before with horror, it's okay, because even familiar roads can be terrifying on a moonless night in the desert.
A film that may look like a sloppy buffet of gore and cheese, but hides a sneaky, fun, self-referential, nougaty center. It's also a film that toys playfully with expectations, tilting its cards only to throw you off guard.
Feast is definitely a guilty pleasure, but there are some genuine thrills. The film has small sets and a small cast. This works to its advantage. It helps you logically understand the setup, the plot, the people, and the danger. It all plays fast and loose and fun, and it's over before you know it. The backdrop of the film, man, it really serves to heighten your experience. What can be better than a seedy bar, seedy characters, and monsters in the desert?
When you toss in the excellent practical effects and gore, of course, and that desert, oh man, yeah, that backdrop is awesome.
This film is a lot like its classic counterpart, Tremors. Both are set in the desert, both are creature features with hungry monsters lurking about. Both use humor and camp to good measure. The differences between the two is basically that Feast is set at night, which actually adds to the horror aspect in my opinion, and Feast is without the likable characters, making their demise that much more fun to watch.
They're the bar brawls from hell. That humor-camp combo is definitely delivered with the panache of a fun, self-deprecating drunk slurring up a story.
And really, like all drunk stories, they are best heard having a cold one of your own. It's Saturday. Tilt back your favorite brew or root beer and have at this bountiful feast. Up next is a film that marks the beginning of our Zombie Sundays. Every Sunday you'll have a selection of zombie films that we're going to pair with The Walking Dead. We're doing it basically as anticipation and celebration of the premiere, which is coming up October 13th. Love it or hate it, that show is like a beacon that tells you fall has arrived and darker times are ahead. That's something that horror fans simply salivate over, and we're no different. So pair up your Sunday viewing with our films and plan accordingly. So to start it off, we offer you Fido.
Ate just the way you like it.
A 3-olive martini. What did I do to deserve this? Ellen, what are you up to? I've had a long day.
Oh, Bill, honestly, sometimes I wonder about you.
Fido digs deep into the proverbial grave and unearths a lovable corpse adapted to great depth. This is definitely not your run-of-the-mill zombie flick. Oh, by no means. On the surface, we get a heartwarming tale akin to Lassie, only we're trading that silky mutt for one of the most charming members of the undead to ever grace the screen.
It didn't take long for post-World War II America to forget the Great Depression and begin to enjoy its renewed economic strength. With wealth came contentment, and so the country sank into a kind of stupor. For the better part of a decade, the majority rigidly ignored the social inequalities within our borders while giving in to our paranoia about external threats. It wasn't until these inequalities finally boiled over into a civil war that erupted in the 1960s that we managed to escape the haze of complacency. Fido is a film that gently but firmly places itself between these eras and comments on that stupor and paranoia. This is more than a zombie gimmick film. It tells the story of a community that is at the beginnings of great change and at a point in time that marks the end of their slumber. Awake, ye lumbering hordes, for adaptability to our changing environment is what makes us human.
Yes, Fido does an excellent job of transporting us to an era of great cultural significance. We are invited to get intimate with this world and to view it through the lens of a subgenre in dire need of some fresh meat. And what a meaty treat we get here. We get a story full of wit and charm, with depth that will keep your jaw to the ground with rigor mortis. It totally leaves that lasting of an impression.
I'm gonna go on a little bit of a rant here. I was looking over how this movie was reviewed, and I was shocked to find that there was basically nothing but lukewarm response by the top critics. Tragic how these critics will go to great lengths to find meaning, purpose, and layers in their so-called art house films, while so easily dismissing the horror genre in general, and this zombie film in particular.
It's a bloody shame, it really is. And you'll also wonder why more filmmakers don't choose to explore the rich storytelling potential of the zombie. The Walking Dead gets away with a lot of praise for its depth of character, but I think any self-respecting zombie fan is doing themselves a huge disservice by dismissing Fido. In Fido, we get a much more hearty mouthful of personality within its characters and story.
Thankfully, Fido has gained a cult following and is slowly gaining a general audience. In due time, I think our viewers and readers will easily understand why we chose Fido as the film to precede The Walking Dead's premiere. It should serve as a reminder that there are other kinds of interesting zombie tales out there.